It just might be the most explosive scandal in Ontario political history. Last night, Patrick Brown denied allegations of sexual misconduct and vowed to fight on even after his campaign team urged him to step down, then resign themselves en masse. Then the PC caucus held a conference call in which members unanimously decided their leader had to go right now. Brown resigned at 1:30 a.m., and here we are. Joining us now to discuss the tumultuous events of the past 24 hours, we welcome Janet Ecker, the former PC cabinet minister; Gillian Smith, PC candidate for the riding of University Rosedale; Kevin Gaudette, co-chair of the PC Election Readiness and Policy Convention; John McEtitian, president of the Bradgate Research Group; Martin Reg-Con, Ontario politics columnist with the Toronto Star; and Cynthia Mulligan, reporter with City News. And we are happy to welcome all of you around this table on what has been just an extraordinary last 24 hours. Just to make sure everybody is on the same page, not only here at the table, but also at home, we've got a quick backgrounder to get everybody up to scratch. So let's have a look.
First, I want to say these allegations are false, categorically untrue, every one of them. I will defend myself as hard as I can with all means at my disposal. A safe and respectful society is what we expect and deserve. And no one appreciates that more than I do. I've got two younger sisters who are my best friends. I've grown up in a family that has taught me good values.
When I hear a young person come forward, a young woman come forward and talk about an experience that she has, as I say, carried the impacts of for years, we have to pay very close attention to that.
This is about women coming forward and calling out behavior that they experienced. And I have to say, I was pretty disgusted by what I heard in terms of their story. And yes, I mean, these are allegations, but I think it's incumbent upon all of us to take those allegations seriously.
Allegations of sexual misconduct must be taken seriously. These women deserve to be heard. It was appropriate that Mr. Brown resign last night. Now it's time for the Ontario PCs to move forward to elect a new parliamentary leader.
Patrick Brown, of course, wanted to hang on. His first press conference suggested he intended to hang on, but then the PC party caucus unanimously determined that he had to go. And in fact, he put this statement out just around 1:30 in the morning. Let's put an excerpt of it up right now. "These allegations are false," Mr. Brown said, "and have been difficult to hear. However, defeating Kathleen Wynne in 2018 is more important than one individual. For this reason, after consulting with caucus, friends, and family, I have decided to step down as leader of the Ontario PC party. I will remain on as an MPP while I definitively clear my name from these false allegations. I'm confident the president of our party and caucus will convene an expedited process to elect my successor, who I look forward to working with." Let us begin our discussion. John McEtitian, I want to start with you. I think around this table you have known Patrick Brown the longest. How many years?
20 years.
20 years. John, have you ever heard of these allegations before?
There are rumors about almost every single politician, and I've heard a variety of things about him. What this clearly indicates is the biggest question today, or the biggest comment that I've seen on Twitter and Facebook and other social media, is that I thought he was gay. So clearly that rumor, which people were digging for that story for the last 2 years, has been disproven.
All right. Have you talked to him since all of this happened?
No.
If you could, what would you say?
That he should do, first I sent him a text last night, which was breathe. He's in a dark place. It is a bad place he's in. It's amazing how fast all of your friends in politics are gone. And first he has to take care of himself. He has to, he's clear, I don't doubt what he has said, but we have two different opinions. And what he needs to do is take care of himself and go clear his name. And that's a private interest. And the party, the caucus, I think that was the conversation they had on the phone call last night, we have no luxury of time. The party has a responsibility to the citizens of Ontario, and Patrick, in consultation with the caucus, got the message that Ontario first, and he stepped aside.
And you think that was the right decision?
It was absolutely the right decision.
It was. Gillian Smith, want to talk to you next. You are one of those candidates that Patrick Brown courted and managed to convince to run. You probably knocked on tens of thousands of doors already. Mm-hmm. You're running in University Rosedale. Mm-hmm. How has your world changed in the past 24 hours?
Well, it hasn't been a fun 24 hours, but in moments like this, what's critical is that we remain calm and we remain focused. That's what's expected of leaders. So in staying calm, I mean, I think the party has done absolutely the right thing all the way through. We've demonstrated that this behavior is not welcome in our party. It is not welcome in our society. Full stop. But then you have to focus.
On what?
On what matters to Ontarians. What ailed Ontario yesterday is what ails Ontario today. And so what we have is a sensible, pragmatic platform that is focused on helping all Ontarians by creating a more prosperous Ontario. That's what I'm focused on.
You'll appreciate the people of Ontario are probably not focused on that right now. They're still trying to figure out what this story is all about. Have you reached out to Patrick Brown in the last 24 hours?
I have not, but what I will say is I've received dozens and dozens and dozens of messages from people across my riding and elsewhere who've said, stay the course. It's time for change. We need to be focused on what really matters, and what really matters are the people of Ontario.
Janet Ecker, when did you get your first job at Queen's Park?
In 1975, when I was a very young person.
Bill Davis was the premier.
Yes, he was. In
those 43 years since then, have you ever experienced anything in provincial politics like the last 24 hours?
No, I haven't. And I think this is sort of one of those tragedies on every level. I mean, it's a tragedy for the young women who are caught up in this. It's certainly a tragedy for Patrick Brown and his family. It's a tragedy for the caucus and all of the work that they've been doing, the party supporters. I mean, it's even for the Liberals, actually, because, they're sitting there in an uncertain position. But sexual inappropriate sexual behavior is not new. I mean, I can remember even in the Davis government, there was a particular cabinet minister who other cabinet ministers said to their staff, don't hang around the office late at night. So I mean, it was just a lot like Hollywood, I mean, there were things going on. It was the time where you might have known it, you might not have, there were rumors. But it's not acceptable anymore, and I think that it is changing, and I think it needs to change, and hopefully we're going to end up in a much better place in terms of relationships between men and women at the end of all of this.
We'll talk about that more a little bit later. Kevin, I want to bring you into the conversation now because you co-chaired the policy conference from which the People's Guarantee came forward. How did you get the news about any of this?
I watched it on TV like the vast majority of other people.
So you knew none of this before?
No.
I'm hearing today that many people thought that the party, whatever that means, party officials, ought to have known something before all this surfaced on television last night. Do you agree with that?
Well, a political process would involve, for a new leader, an internal opposition research campaign, which would involve asking the leader to, in front of a very small, close-knit senior group, uncover the skeletons so that they can triage and prepare how to deal with, get ahead of those types of skeletons. My speculation, it's just that speculation, is that one of the main reasons, not the only main reason that his senior staff left, is it's very possible that the leader wasn't totally honest with his staff about what those issues were. And it's very difficult to work with a leader if they're not going to be honest with those types of situations.
What obligation was there on party officials to have adequately vetted him, though, when he put his name forward for PC party leader?
Well, there is an ongoing process that can be undertaken, but simply put, it's up to the membership to make these decisions. And they actually, from a leadership perspective, don't do that type of due diligence.
Is there any mandatory disclosure form or something like that a prospective candidate has to sign?
There is for a candidate at the candidate level, but not at the leadership level.
Gotcha. Martin, let's sort of reveal a dirty little secret here, I guess, that a lot of people who cover Queen's Park have heard rumors for years. John suggested it a second ago about Patrick Brown and his behavior. What obligation has there been on the media over the years to investigate this and find out if there was any truth behind it?
That's a good question, and I think the public may be wondering that as well. Look, reporters, journalists get all kinds of information that comes across their desk, and I think we have to draw a distinction between rumors and allegations that have some, about which you can have greater certainty, or at least you can build more facts around it, and you have people, live people, who are telling you things. So, as I think John has pointed out, there are rumors about many politicians, and
had you heard them?
Not these specific rumors,
no.
But I hear rumors about other politicians, and there were certainly rumors about Patrick Brown, some of which the Toronto Star checked out a couple of years ago and found nothing. And so yeah, I don't think I can go beyond that. I don't think any journalists are hiding anything. If any journalists had any information that they felt they could flush out and get past libel lawyers and met the test of credibility, they wouldn't hold it back, no matter which party they were from. I mean, the Toronto Star has written stories about Liberal scandals, NDP problems, Tory problems, and you just have to have the facts.
Cynthia, you were at Queen's Park last night.
Yes, I was.
At that 10 o'clock news conference in which he basically said, I intend to fight for my job.
Voice quivering. He
What was that
clearly
like
in
last night?
distress. Well, it was shocking. I mean, when the word came out that there was an emergency late night news conference, you knew it was going to be serious. And I called somebody that is fairly close with his campaign and said, what's going on? Is it what I think it is? Because I had heard these rumors, which our newsroom had also checked out over the past couple of years. But if you can't prove it, and if you don't have somebody coming forward, and you don't even know if your source is reliable and what their motivation is on telling you this, you have to be really careful, and you don't want to destroy somebody, and you have to be able to back it up. So that aside, I asked this person, is it what I think it is? Is it addressing these rumors? And they said yes. So I went having an understanding or an idea of what to expect, but I wasn't expecting him to be so broken. I mean, he was really floundering and clearly in great distress and didn't seem to have any backup. And I think that last night will go down in crisis management as a lesson in what not to do, because I think everything that happened was what you should never do in that situation. And
if you have a choice.
Well, he had a choice. He didn't have to go in front of the media and hold a late night news conference that I think he was warned not to do or advised not to do. And then not taking questions and running down the stairs, fleeing the media is probably one of the worst optics you can have in this situation.
Never do your own spin. I mean, if there's one thing I've learned in politics, if you have a problem of some kind, the last thing you do is take your own advice, because no matter how smart you are, no matter how experienced you are, you're never going to make the right judgment. And I mean, I don't fault him for what he did. I mean, God, I mean, when you're in public life, I mean, you never know when you're going to be involved in something, whether you're at fault or not, but never do your own spin.
You're too emotionally involved.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
What's different from this event, I think, without even commenting or trying to assess the facts of this case, is, as everyone has suggested here, how the crisis was handled at a personal level, the fact that the staff resigned, the fact that the staff advised him to resign and he rejected that advice, and so they themselves quit. The suggestion, which I've been able to test out, that some of the staff felt that Patrick Brown wasn't being straight with them, that his story didn't stand up to scrutiny even when they were testing it out last night. And that exit, I think everyone around this table has seen or been at events where a politician tries to get away from the media. You can say enough questions, you can get into a car, but to actually have that kind of cinematic exit where you're going down the hallways and going down 3 flights of stairs in a heritage building and into a car with cameras following you, that's just not how you handle a crisis if you're a leader.
Cynthia, you were racing down the stairs after?
I was chasing, cell phone in hand, taking video, yes.
3
Definitely.
flights of stairs. Mm-hmm. John, obviously, had he had his time back, I presume Mr. Brown would have preferred to do something at the podium with the whole caucus behind him, something indicating that everybody was still with him. He was out there by himself. Who let him go out there by himself?
Did he have anybody to support him to tell him not to at that point?
I think there's the 2 parts to that. So one would be his closest advisors. Not everybody jumped ship to try to pad their resumes at the 11th hour and the 59th minute. And to those people, Martin, my concept is very simple. They are all duplicitous. To resign at the last minute on Twitter, for me, it's very clear that they are either traitorous, duplicitous, self-serving, and in a world of trust, that word can never be used with any of them again. Anybody who's professional would have stood with the leader, maybe not publicly, but at least behind scenes for 24 hours, and they were all self-serving people.
But guys, I mean, the current mood is pretty poisonous on all of these things,
Well,
right? So I was just going to say, none of us know what we would do in that horrible, I mean, for all of them. I mean, it was just sort of one of your nightmares, right, in politics, because you never know. I mean, in politics, as I used to say, you have nothing to fear but your next sentence, or somebody might make an allegation about you, and you're right. I mean, there were rumors about every politician I've ever known. There were rumors about them. So to me, it's not a question of let's judge how they all performed, because they made the calls at the time, right or wrong. They're going to have to live with those choices. I think what's important now is how do we all go forward?
But but there's two more parts to that. Yeah. So as to whether or not why he was alone. So somebody made that call, and I don't know that it was Patrick. So for me, comes back to competence. How can senior campaign staff, how can the campaign manager, how can the chief of staff, how can they not have, we've all worked on leaderships before, we've worked for various leaders, that kind of work you prepare if there's something you think might one day blow up. You have a file ready, you have a plan in place, you do that work. So these people were either didn't do their work or were incompetent in how they did it.
Let me get Kevin on this. You know all the people that John is talking about here, and you heard some pretty tough adjectives used to describe them. You want to come back on that?
I'll come back to the point I made earlier, which is I was led to believe that the party was prepared from an opposition research perspective for a variety of scenarios. They gamed them out. They prepared them. They had ads filmed and shot and in the can and ready to go, prepared on a number of fronts. And the fact that the staff acted the way they did, I'm inferring implies to me that this was a scenario for which they weren't prepared, which indicates to me it wasn't shared with them. And that's an important trust issue that I'm not sure as a staffer I could have worked through either. I wasn't there. I'm not privy to what the conversations were. I'm speculating. But that's an important bond of trust on a very sensitive modern topic for women making very serious and damaging allegations, damaging to themselves, damaging to the leader. This is important, serious stuff. We're not just talking about a $16 cheeseburger with Bev Oda here. We're talking about lives and mental
orange
health
juice.
issues.
Glass of orange juice, that's what it was, yeah.
Right. So I think it's hard to triage how a staff would handle that. And if that trust is that seriously broken, they also have a duty to the party, and not just to the leader. So we get into complicated questions: is it party first or leader first? And I worked beside them in developing the convention and the platform. I thought they did good work. I had the greatest respect for these individuals in question, and I really don't think I want to second guess their decision.
Can I just say briefly that to Kevin's point, that I think that the staff, having lost trust in their leader, had a loyalty to the party and to the caucus to signal that they weren't going to dig in and that they had reached the end of the road. So I think some of them had concluded from talking to them that they had the best interests of the party at heart. I don't know that we can impute motives about resumes and so on. I don't think anyone's hiring right now for them. And they may end up getting rehired if the party is smart, in my opinion, because they were professional. And I have found the staff at Queen's Park who are involved in this, I don't know the people at the campaign, on the campaign side directly, to be professional.
I want to go back with you if I can. At some point, many months ago, you and Patrick Brown had a meeting, and he tried, I presume, to convince you to run for him. Is that right? How'd that meeting go?
It went well. It worked. It worked.
You're the candidate.
Yeah, but I signed on to the Progressive Conservative Party, and my name will be on that ballot. And I'm proud that my name is on that ballot. That is what I'm focused on. So maybe I have a different perspective of this. I'm not part of the Queen's Park bubble. This is a new world for me.
Your first run.
It is, and it's the best adventure I've ever been on. However, my focus is on the fact that I've committed my good name, and there are many, many other fantastic candidates who've committed their good names to this endeavor. And so what are people expecting of us? They're expecting of us to say, what are we going to do differently to make life better for the people of Ontario? That's my focus.
I mean, I presume it's difficult, however, because this is a people business, and he's the person who kind of brought you in the door. And I understand now how you have to sort of say, well, let's move on. He's not there, so I've got to move on.
I've lived through leader transitions before in the private sector. You get through it, but it's to stay calm and stay focused on what the end goal is.
I got an email today. I got an email today from an Anglican priest, believe it or not, who wrote this. Sheldon, can we get this graphic up, please? Naturally, I have no personal knowledge of the accusations being leveled against Patrick Brown, and no reason to believe that they aren't true. But still, I find myself hesitating and wondering about the reality that now, in the current climate we find ourselves in, with the rapidity of the spread of news, whether it's entirely fair for a public figure, or a private one for that matter, to be tried and convicted within seconds. Again, I am not disbelieving the women who bring these accusations against him. I'm only commenting on and expressing some discomfort with the lack of any sense of due process. He didn't want his name known, but he said I can describe him as an Anglican priest. And then Martha Jackson then sent me this on Twitter. Please discuss tonight the unsettling speed of this trial by media. Patrick Brown, guilty or not guilty, has the right to a fair hearing. Okay, Martha, we are taking your advice, so here we go. Kevin, the notion that Brown has not had a fair hearing is out there. What's your view on that?
Well, I think a couple of things. So I think to a certain extent it's true that he hasn't had a fair, so we can unpack the question of fairness. So these allegations were made, they're actually not allegations of criminality. They're important allegations of impropriety. In one case it's sexual impropriety with a staffer. One of them is a allegation of sexual impropriety with an underage individual. It's not clear if he knew that person was underage. It's not clear if these things happened, of course. But there's a difference between the court of criminal courts and the court of public opinion. And importantly, from the fairness, his caucus got to try him. And the fact that 26 other, I believe it's 26 other members of, 26 to 27 members, elected officials who have a fiduciary duty to their party and their constituents, decided unanimously that they didn't have confidence in him, that's a trial of a kind, especially from a political perspective. So I actually think this is a little bit different than the Ansari type situation. There's a different level of complexity involved here, and there are other checks and balances. 5 senior staff step aside, 26 MPPs lose confidence in the leader. That's not just the court of public opinion.
I hear you, but one of the reasons why Patrick Brown presumably could not get the confidence of his caucus to continue was because social media exploded last night and television covered it all live. Cynthia, I'll bring you in at this point. Was it trial by media last night?
Well, I would say it was trial by social media. Absolutely. The media was covering what was happening. Social media decided very quickly his guilt or innocence, and it was overwhelmingly guilt on social media. And he has definitely been swept up in the Me Too movement. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt about it. And it's startling to watch. I have concerns about innocent people being swept up in it. And I also worry that one day we'll see a backlash to it as well.
Martin, social media.
Well, I'm going to dissent only a tiny bit. Let's not take away from the legacy mainstream media. This story was researched, brought to bear, went through expensive libel lawyers, thanks to CTV, bringing the story forward. So let's not forget the mainstream media. I don't know that social media would have been decisive in this factor because social media is still only a segment of the voting population. I think Kevin's point is germane, that there was a hearing by the caucus and they made their point. I think we need to remember too that in this case, the Aziz Ansari example comes to mind, understandably, and that was a nuanced event that has received a lot of analysis. But in this case, according to the CTV report, the suggestion is that these were teenagers, high school age, more or less, drunk, and he wasn't. He's a known teetotaler, and it's 2, and 1 is a staffer. I mean, it's not just a bad date, if that's even the right word to use about these kinds of situations. There was a suggestion. I mean, we just had a big controversy in the U.S. with Roy Moore, I guess is his name, the Alabama
senator in Alabama.
Yeah, the Alabama senator who preyed on teenage kids, younger. And people are tired of that, and maybe people didn't want that here.
If I can, not that I want to use that example, but since you've put it out there, him always, when he did a press conference and fought his way all the way through the primary and then the general election, versus Patrick last night, Roy Moore had people behind him because he had a relationship, he had supporters, he had a wife, he had a family, he had a lot of supporters. Patrick quietly has not led the party since he became leader in the last 2 years in a way that was big tent. There's a place for everybody in my party. If you disagree with me completely, I still respect you and I want you and hug you, the way many of our leaders in the past, most famously probably Bill Davis and Mike Harris. They both had big tables, didn't matter who you supported for leader, everybody was invited. Patrick told people they weren't needed. So, and the caucus is always, Janet would know way better than I, but that's always an interesting relationship between any leader and the caucus. So when you hear something like this, to have a leap of faith, to stand with someone in front of the media throng, you better have a relationship that says, I don't care what they say, I'm with you, or even if they're true, I still stand with you for the moment because I love and respect you. And I'm going to suggest there was very little of that last night in the party.
Well, I think, but first of all, politics is unfair. I mean, it is an unfair world. I mean, it's a blood sport. They don't call it a blood sport for nothing. And so whether there had been social media or not, I mean, let's just roll it back. I mean, if, you know, I can remember if I had been, you know, standing there in a cabinet or caucus or whatever, and one of our colleagues had, you know, there would have been that, whether it would have happened as fast or be as intense, maybe not, but I would be very surprised if that person was still in cabinet or was still sort of, you know, formally in caucus or whatever, fairly quickly for something this serious. So I think that's the first thing. And whether you're in politics or whether you're in business, one of the things, and again, it's not fair, but when you are caught up in something like that, the best thing you can do is get out of the line of fire, step aside, because you're not doing your organization any good. You're not doing yourself any good, because the problem, you can't focus on doing your job and fighting whatever the allegation is. So the fact that he was advised to step aside, the fact that he eventually did, is what you should do in those circumstances, even when it is not fair. But the third point is we are in an environment now, and I don't know what the answer is, but we've got to sort of all take a deep breath and say, how are we going to go forward on this? Because I have heard all kinds of comments in the last 24 hours from men and women that just this whole thing makes everybody uncomfortable. You know, people want to be supportive of the women, but they're also saying, wait a minute, I mean, this is like the Salem witch trials.
Well, that's what Christy Blatchford had to say today in the National Post.
Absolutely.
It's open season on men, is what she said.
I don't know what the response is, but the other part of the mood that this whole thing is in is that what unfortunately is happening is that rape, the Harvey Weinstein stuff is ending up being in the same bucket as potentially a bad date, and potentially where a man and a woman miscommunicated and whatever, and behavior happened, and whatever circumstance. And I don't know about everybody else here, but I've had experiences in my life where it was like, okay, this wasn't the right thing to have happened, or I shouldn't have done what I did, or the guy shouldn't have done what he did. But there's a difference between that and someone who's threatening your job, who's like physically, all of that kind of stuff. And right now it's all getting put in the same pot. And that I think is making it very difficult for voters, for people to handle it. Like, there's a difference in how you need to deal with those things.
Sylvia Jones, the deputy leader from Dufferin-Caledon, had a press conference today along with Steve Clark, who's from Eastern Ontario, Leeds, Grenville, I think, or Leeds, whatever the name of the riding is. Lanark? Now I'm losing it. Anyways, Sylvia Jones said these women have a right to be heard.
Yes, they do.
She specifically did not say these women have a right to be believed. I noticed the difference. Anybody, what do we make of that difference?
Well, in our system, people can make allegations, and there are supposed to be processes for deciding if those allegations are true. And you can criticize that process. Is it fair? Is it not fair? There's no question. There's legitimate debate about all of that, and how do you support people who are making allegations, because they need support as well, whatever. But they are still allegations. And I think if we lose that, we are losing a very fundamental part of what a democratic, law-bounded society is supposed to be all about.
In which case, I've got to ask Gillian, do you believe Patrick Brown had to step down?
I fully agree with the actions of our caucus and how they've handled it. And I'm just thinking about what Janet said. And what I can tell you is one of the worst things that can happen to a person is when you feel as though you've not been heard, when you feel as though you do not have a voice. So it's really important. What Sylvia said is right. These women have to know that they have been heard, that we are acting, that other women, if they feel that if they need to be heard, they will be heard. That's who we are.
She's not saying believe, as opposed to Kathleen Wynne and Andrea Horvath,
yes,
who took a completely different stance and went much further and said, we believe them, we all need to protect them, we all need to speak out.
And at least the Premier a week ago believed somebody else who, after a few days of police investigation, found out that the story was completely fictitious.
What are you talking about, John?
The girl in Toronto who slandered an Asian men as a group, and it was a complete and total. The Prime Minister and the Premier were out there on the bandwagon, and it's like, whoa, could you have waited a few more days? And for us, it's 133 days from today when Ontario will decide who their next government is.
Yep.
She may have knocked on 10,000 doors, but she's got to knock on another 30,000 in those days. There is no time to waste. There's very little time for reflection.
There's a difference in the political environment, sorry, Janet, so let's imagine for a second, imagine that the allegation was true. So there's a believability question for senior staff and 26 members of caucus who get to decide whether or not they believe enough of it. So I talked to a number of women that I know in my life around this issue, and let's imagine the allegations were true for a second. So you've got an individual in one case who would have allegedly acted inappropriately against a staffer. Now, in the private sector, that would be, and when was told no, stopped. So the consent was, we're not talking criminal sexual assault or so there's inappropriate behavior between a boss and staff. In many instances in the private sector, that's not a firing offense.
Really?
It is in
I
politics.
think it is, actually. In
Well,
the private sector, I think that's a
I'm not
firing
sure.
offense today.
Well, actually, not sure it's as clear as that. Maybe it is. My point is less that, though, than there's no doubt it is a firing offense in politics because the rules are different.
Right. But the other reason why, and I was policy director at the doctors' regulatory body, College of Physicians and Surgeons, when we went through discovering and trying to fix the fact that there were physicians who were sexually abusing patients. And one of the things that you learn, why it's so important for women to be heard on this, is that it gives other women the support or enables them to come forward. And again, it does take a lot of guts for a woman who's been the victim of something like that to come forward. But secondly, frequently there's a pattern. And if one can come forward, what often will happen, and we've seen, well, we certainly saw this with the Weinstein case, there are others come forward, and you do get the information and the evidence that you need to actually take appropriate, or what should be the action you should be taking that's appropriate. So it's very important for women to be heard and to have the opportunity to bring forward things of this kind.
Martin.
Steve, can I circle back to your first question about should they be heard?
Please.
And to sidestep the believability question for a second. One of the problems with Patrick Brown's statement that night, where he was trying, in my view, to bluff his way through the allegations, is that he specifically concluded by saying, I have instructed my attorneys to take legal action on a case of defamation. And that's a way to silence the accusers, in my opinion. And maybe that's his right. Maybe he wants to fight it out in court. But that's not saying people have a right to be heard. That's him saying, I have a legal right to have you not heard by people, number one. Number two, part of the job description for an opposition leader is to stir things up. I get that. But given all the things he had said over the last couple of years, as part of his job, I suppose, about the Liberals, about the gas plants, about the Sudbury bribery trial, where people were acquitted.
He himself had been sued, right?
Not only was he sued, but he argued that really the court of public opinion matters more than the law courts. So it's hard to argue now that the man ought to have some kind of exemption or dispensation from the court of public opinion.
When I mentioned I worried that there was a backlash or could be a potential backlash, there is a wave, I did a story on this recently, of men who are potentially suing the women who accused them. And we know in the courts that the conviction rate is so low because it's so difficult to prove a he said, she said situation that very often they're not getting a conviction and then they are vulnerable to a potential lawsuit. So that was what I was referring to as a backlash. And I did feel that, Martin, you're right, he was hinting that that could be the route. And it is a way to silence people, definitely.
Let me, at this juncture, play some tape here. As I mentioned, Sylvie Jones, Steve Clark held a news conference at Queen's Park today, essentially to talk about what the PC party does right now. We'll get to that in a second, but there was something, Sheldon, I'm in the middle of page 6 here. Let's roll this clip. Sylvie Jones said something about the nature of what transpired, and the word she used, I think, caught a lot of people off guard. Roll it, please.
Have you lost the election?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. No way. How can you stand there and say that, given what happened? Tell me why you feel you have not lost.
Because we are so far ahead in terms of planning, in terms of nominations, in terms of fundraising. We have the plan in place to succeed in 2018. Was last night a hiccup? Absolutely. But we are going to move forward with it, and we are going to make sure that we put in place the processes to ensure that we have a winning team in 2018.
Gillian, I know a lot of people in the media particularly seized on that word hiccup. Last night was more than a hiccup, wasn't it?
Well, and Sylvia herself said it. She took it right back in a tweet and said, this is more than a hiccup. I misspoke. I'm sorry.
Would you agree, Janet?
Oh yeah, this is definitely not a hiccup.
This is more than a hiccup.
Absolutely.
But to reiterate Gillian's point, you didn't carry it in a clip, but it was actually fairly authentic of Sylvia when the media pointed out that as she was freewheeling in her speech there, she used the word hiccup, she was called on it, and she immediately retracted and changed it. I think that was a fairly authentic moment, so I really think that's making a mouse out of a molehill.
As I said, you have nothing to fear but your next sentence. I mean, you say things that come out the wrong way or whatever, and it is unfortunate that in this day and age, everything just becomes a criminal offense almost, in terms of that.
Maybe you're leading to this, Steve, so I don't want to preempt you, but hiccup was the wrong word.
Yes.
But she was answering the question, is everything lost? And I think what she may have meant to say is, it's a setback. And clearly, all is not lost for the Tories.
Well, as usual, you anticipate my next question, because that is exactly what I wanted to get to next. Look at Patrick, I was about to say all of this aside. I don't want to put all of this aside, but you know what I'm trying to say here. Patrick Brown is a phenomenal fundraiser. Patrick Brown took the PC party from 12,000 members to 200,000 members. Patrick Brown made remarkable inroads into multicultural communities in a way that the party has not seen in years and years and years. Having said that, he's a little charismatically challenged. He is not a great speaker. He did not connect well with women. The polls show that. Here's my question. If the Conservatives replace Patrick Brown with somebody who's really good, is it possible all is not lost? John.
It's by no means lost. Okay, so let's again in the past we've actually had entire platforms decided upon by one person, the leader of the party, and Kevin was the co-chair of that policy process. And I can tell you, policy matters to me. I'm a mechanic, but I have friends that are policy geeks, and I actually read every single word of the document, and I actually wasn't upset or disagreed with anything in it. And that was not the work of the leader or just the 30 caucus members, but of thousands and thousands and thousands of people who were involved in that process and brought it forward. It was the most consultative thing ever. And there was a lot of pride in that, and as a document, as a showpiece.
A rare compliment.
Martin's got a
rare compliment.
Well, no, I call them as I see them. Martin's got a copy of it. I think it's saying I think we need a new picture for the front. But other than that, seriously, that plan stands. And let's be clear, that says the People's Guarantee. That represents the PC Party of Ontario, and that represents all of us. And one man is now stepped aside, and a new leader will take that place, and we will move on.
I don't mean this to be a smart-ass question, but can you literally put a new leader's face on that platform and just go right out there?
I believe you can.
You can.
Well, because all of caucus and all of the candidates, I mean, it went through a process, and they all said, yes, we're going to run with that. So, I mean, I think it is legitimate that the party could do that.
And if I can just say, maybe we'll get a newer, smarter communications person who will say, you know what would be great? Gillian's pictures should be on the ones that they're using in her writing and on her website, and maybe every single candidate, should have their, because it's her plan.
124 different covers.
Let's be clear. That document, okay, that Patrick Brown, any leader, their name is on one ballot. In her writing, it's her name, not any leader.
But they have to choose the right person this time. I mean, if you look at the last election, Kathleen Wynne did not win that election. Tim Hudak lost the election.
The party after the last election had 13 mea culpa sessions, which were amazing because all the prospective leadership candidates started attending them, and it was the first time I saw politicians sit and listen. And I actually got to a point in the process, about 6 meetings in, where I started defending Tim Hudak from the backlash and saying, look, let's be clear. No leader says, what stupid thing can I do? What wrong person can I hire to blow up my campaign? Human error, political mistakes, they happen. And hopefully, guess what? We would like to not make any, and that's not this one.
I want to hear from Gillian on this, because you're the one who's going to have to go out there to the people and ask for their vote based on a brand new leader with 4.5 months to go, that, you know, Patrick Brown was leader for 2.5 years. Half the people still didn't know who he was. Can you do this in 4.5 months?
Yes, of course we can.
How?
Well, I mean, first of all, you asked if all is lost. Well, if all were lost, I wouldn't be here talking to you, if I actually believed that. And I agree with John. That document is the strongest document we've put out. It represents the will of the hundreds of people we consulted, the thousands of people who weighed in. A lot of hard work listening to Ontarians went in to build that document. It is the right plan for Ontario.
And you know as well as I do, the reason they put the leader's picture on the cover is that because people want to, that document has to personify somebody. Who's that somebody?
So the question of who the leader is obviously a critical one. But what I would encourage you to do is look at the team. Look at the team we've built. We've drawn that team from every sector. It is one of the most diverse groups you'll ever be able to see. It is filled with talented people. I encourage everybody, look at the entire team we've put together because it is formidable.
Strongest team in 20 years.
Well, and Cynthia's quite right. I mean, however they decide to choose a new leader, they have to pick the right person who to go forward with, because policy is important, and I think most voters, you know, in many ways, they just want to know you've got a plan. They sometimes don't care that much about what's in it. They just want to make sure you've got a plan and it resonates with you, et cetera. But I think choosing the right leader will be really important. I think the good news is that there are a lot of good, strong people potentially in caucus and outside of caucus, candidates who could very well make excellent leaders, who've got the skill set or whatever. And obviously it's up to caucus and the executive, the candidates, to decide who they want. But
Kevin.
Well, aside from our great team of candidates, one of whom we've got tonight. Last night when voters went to bed, they didn't like Kathleen Wynne and her crooked government. And they woke up this morning, the PC party's changed, but voters suddenly haven't woken up and fallen in love with Kathleen Wynne. They hate her and her government just as much as they did last night.
Hydro still costs
So
more than it should.
Ontarians still are looking for an out. And I think there's a great opportunity for the party now to do a refresh. Whomever that person is, he or she has an opportunity we can shed a light on. I'm a fan of the idea of having a leadership election. You know, my opinion is one amongst many.
A leadership election between now and?
I think we can have one now and in the next 8 weeks. And I think it's a great opportunity to shine light on a bunch of different voices and refresh the party and get a new face. I'm fairly confident I'm in the minority of opinion at the table on that issue, but I think there's an opportunity for it now, yes.
Who's the person you want to lead the party going forward?
I haven't spoken to enough candidates to actually make that decision, to be candid.
Janet, there aren't any candidates yet.
Who should
exactly,
but I think
Vic Fideli has thrown his hat in.
Listen, and Vic, I mean, I've got a lot of time for Vic. I think Vic would be very good. I think Rod Phillips, who's running in my riding, would be phenomenal.
Ajax.
In Ajax, I think Carolyn Mulrooney would be phenomenal. You know, so I think there are some
Lisa
choices.
McLeod,
I think
Peter Bethlen-Falvey.
Well, I think there's a lot of good choices, but I think the other thing that's really, really important is, you know, Premier Wynne is a very, very formidable campaigner. She believes in what she's doing. She's put forward some policies and proposals that a lot of Ontarians, they may not like some things, they may even not like her, but anybody who thinks going into this election that it's going to be a cakewalk is, I think, making a big mistake. I mean, I think we're going to, and she's experienced, she's done this before, so she's formidable.
Vote, Brother Red Con, if you had a vote, who is the best person to lead the Conservative Party right now if they want to be successful on June the 7th?
Well, I think you and I both know that might be the kiss of death if coming from me at the Toronto Star. But
it'll end up on the brochure, you know. Yeah.
Martin Cohn endorses.
But you may remember a good 3 or 4 years ago, I said Vic Fideli was the best choice, and of course everybody thought I was misleading them and it was some kind of evil disinformation campaign. But I may be proven right, and eventually, who knows? Fideli would be a voice of stability. He's experienced. You mentioned Carolyn Mulrooney. I don't know what she would be bringing to the table in terms of life experience that would be pertinent, given that she's never been a politician.
Neither had her father.
Nor has
ever
Rod
been
Phillips.
a politician.
He had been been a counsel to the Cleach Commission. He had been a very high-profile labor lawyer.
Carolyn is a woman of accomplishment as well. You're right, she doesn't have the political experience. Rod Phillips is also of great accomplishment, and what Rod has done is he's had private sector, public sector, government experience politically. He hasn't run, but political experience. And I think if there's one thing we've seen in politics is that you can't make any predictions these days about who might actually be able to make it.
But my point isn't to say there's anything wrong with Carolyn Mulrooney. She might be a fantastic leader in a year or two. I think that might have been her plan, in fact. To jump in now at this point cold with no experience whatsoever, I think would be a leap of faith for the party. Can I just give you one quick footnote? You mentioned, everyone here, the People's Guarantee. The People's Guarantee, let's remind listeners, was in fact a guarantee that Patrick Brown would step down if he broke his bond with the voters by not implementing his 5 plans: cutting taxes, cheaper hydro, more mental health, more childcare, and trust and accountability. And unfortunately, he jumped the gun on that.
Jillian, you don't get a vote. The caucus is going to vote tomorrow on who they want to see the interim leader be, and maybe the full-time leader. But if you had a vote, who would you give it to?
Whoever it is, I'm behind him or her.
John, my question for you is, the caucus has to make a decision about whether or not the person they put in as the interim leader is actually going to be sort of the permanent leader who goes and leads this party in an election campaign. Should it be the same person or 2 different people?
Completely wrong. So rare to say that to you. It is not. The caucus under our Constitution picks the interim leader, period. Everything else is up to our party executive. So as mandated by the Constitution, because I kind of wrote the section, our party executive is charged now that there's a vacancy, right? And let's be clear here. Patrick Brown did the best thing for Ontario by stepping down. He could have hunkered in. He could have said, you're with me, won't nominate you. He could have taken on the world and burned the party to the ground, and he didn't. So our executive now is in charge. Tomorrow, caucus will pick an interim leader, and our executive now has a decision. They can, as many people will say, have a leadership in some date in the next few days or weeks, or they have one condition. It has to be held. They have to call the election for the new leader within 6 months, and it must be held within 18. So interestingly, if there was any nefarious shenanigans trying to cause our party harm, which some people are saying behind all of this, the reality is our party can go with the interim leader if the executive so chooses, and after the election, if our party is not led by the premier, we will then go through a normal course of a leadership review. The party could call a leadership convention right away. That could all happen. If we come out of the election led by the premier, 2 separate jobs, I would think that our party might acquiesce and say, we'll follow the voters of Ontario.
Does the interim leader, whom the caucus will pick tomorrow, have to be a member of the caucus?
No.
The Constitution is silent on that.
Constitution is silent on that. So it does allow for the option of a Caroline Mulrooney or a Rod Phillips.
It would be rare and fairly unprecedented, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't happen.
Well, we're in new territory
Exactly.
in a lot of ways right now.
To be fair to caucus, again, they've got a very important decision. And if you have any semblance of, I really feel uncomfortable with the leader who just left because I didn't know them as well as I may have, or maybe I did and something else is going on. Picking somebody that has not been in the House with them, that has not been on legislative committees, that has not been in the back rooms with them since the last election or since that individual was elected in by-elections, I would think as a human being, my gut and as conservatives, that the safer bet for them would be, let's pick from among the people that are the most known, with all due respect to all the great people from outside, because I believe there's a half dozen people in caucus who would run for leader.
Who would you pick?
And I believe that there's at least a half dozen people outside of caucus.
Who would you pick,
I think
John?
they'll pick from within.
Who would you pick, John?
I will defer to caucus.
But this thing that, people aren't known necessarily. Well, no opposition leader, is known when he or she gets elected.
Dalton McGuinty was.
Well, or Mike Harris or
Didn't
whatever.
he get elected on the 5th or 6th ballot?
Yeah, but what's important is that whoever gets picked for the next couple of months, there's going to be intensive coverage of them. And as you get closer to the election, the media works very hard to cover all 3 party leaders equally. So you all of a sudden get on an equal footing with the premier of the day. So that thing about people don't know them, I think, disappears quite quickly. And the question becomes, how do we get known
And
well?
what an introduction they'll get, because it will be a major story. And
Well, that's right. So how do we make sure we put our best foot forward, whoever the candidate might be?
Martin, I know I've talked to conservatives today who've said, damn it all, we did it again. Here we go again. It's going to be 5 losses in a row. I'd like your opinion on how you think the events of the last 24 hours will affect the vote on June 7th.
Well, the caveat, of course, and I repeat this all the time, is I can't make predictions. Nobody knows. It's more volatile than ever, especially in Ontario. That said, I do believe that Patrick Brown was the best thing that Kathleen Wynne and Andrea Horwath had going for them. You say that the new leader will get more coverage. You're absolutely right, Janet. but it wasn't for want of trying with Patrick Brown. The Toronto Star gave him a lot of ink, some of it quite positive, especially at the November convention that you were part of. And his
front page above the fold.
Front page above the fold, well put.
Nice picture, too.
And more people in Ontario said they didn't know him, and slightly more people said they didn't like him. So, slightly more said they didn't like him than liked him, and about 44% or so over the last few months have said they don't know who he is, don't know much about him, don't know what they think of him. And so that was a problem for him. I think losing Patrick Brown, to your question, may have been the best thing that happened to this party, and better late than never.
What will be really critical, whoever the leader is that the party acts, the caucus, everybody acts like adults, that they look like they're coming together, there's going to be a consensus, whatever the decision is, whoever it is gets to lead, that everybody falls in behind that person. If the party does what sometimes parties in opposition do and start spatting amongst themselves, I don't care who the leader is, the voters are going to say to heck with that.
Cynthia, I think we have to talk just for a moment here about the governing Liberals. I talked to a Liberal cabinet minister today who swore up and down nobody is reacting with glee in the Liberal caucus. What have you heard?
Well, I was standing in the hallways of Queen's Park and I noticed a certain, happier step by the Liberals as they were walking down the hallway. I can't say anybody looked glum on the Liberal camp. My first question to the Premier in her news conference today was, is this going to help or hurt your campaign? And she sidestepped the question, and I don't think she really knows, because it really does depend who the Conservatives bring in. Because
Sorry, Cynthia.
No, that's okay.
If a week is a lifetime in politics, there's 18 weeks till voting day.
18 lifetimes.
18 lifetimes. A week ago, we thought we had a leader. Now we don't. And let's be clear. Patrick Brown's press conference occurred at 9:45 p.m. last night. The CTV news story occurred at 10 p.m. last night. Here we are 23 hours later, some small number of which a few of us slept. 24 hours later, we're already moving forward. The right decision was made and everything's moving. Talk about how swift things are happening in 24 hours.
Warp speed.
There's a lot of water to go into the bridge.
We've lived a week in the last 24 hours.
We've got a lot of water to go to the bridge
Well,
in
and
the next
actually
18
one of the things that I thought was interesting was the Premier waited. She waited before she said something, which I thought was actually quite smart.
I think the pendulum has swung. 14 years in government, and there's a lot of baggage. I think voters are ready to vote in a new government, but they want to have somebody they want to vote for.
Martin, let me raise this with you. I don't know about you, but I have had the odd contact from Liberal officials who have put a bug in my ear about this story many months ago. And it goes back to what I was suggesting earlier. I wonder how gleeful the Liberals are or are not today with regard to this. Certainly as the governing party that has been in for 14 years, whose poll numbers are not great right now, but still within spitting distance, and whose premier is deeply unpopular, presumably you can't be troubled about the fact that a major bomb has just been dropped on your major opponent in this race. Have I got that wrong?
So clearly this is disruptive, but Brown was so dislikable. I'm not trying to beat him up on him. I'm just trying to look at the numbers that we've seen for the last little while, and he was just hard to love, hard for his caucus to love.
The party was in first place in the polls, still
Correct,
is.
but had lost its lead considerably, depending on which poll you look at. But you've had some pollsters on the show and suggesting that lead was ephemeral and fragile. I happen to think that the so-called negatives against Kathleen Wynne are exaggerated. They are real negatives, but they don't seem to be impacting the party vote quite as much. So everyone focuses on the fact that Andrew Horwath is at roughly 40% popularity, Patrick Brown was somewhere below that, and Kathleen Wynne was in the teens. But Andrew Horwath's party was third place. The Liberals in some polls have been first or second. And so there's not really there is, the party brand can matter far more. There's a huge appetite for change here, but I think we're right that it depends on what that change is. And if they can't get the leader right, and they can't get the party to look like it's ready to govern, then that's a problem. To say we will continue to watch this story with interest is the understatement of the century. I want to thank everybody for making time in their schedule to come into us at TVO tonight and share your views. Janet Ecker, Gillian Smith, I want to find out how your door knocking is going to go in the next little while. Kevin Gaudet over here, John McAtishon over here, Cynthia Mulligan over there, Martin Redcon of the Toronto Star over there. Thank you so much, everybody.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.